Hey, everybody, Joe Joseph here. This is the DailySheeple.com's Daily News Brief. I'm going to start with the Daily Sheeple's article by Melissa Dykes that discusses where's the humanity. It says anti-Trump protesters laughing, wishing Trump supporters' houses would burn down in Gatlinburg. Let me just let this sink in for a minute because, and this may be an extended news brief because of what I think is being set up here. And other personalities in the independent media also are kind of coming to similar conclusions. But I'm going to try and set the table for you here to give you an idea. But I wanted to start off with this article by Melissa Dykes because it kind of shows you how things are being set up, the divide and conquer. And I think it's only going to get worse as time goes on up to and after the Trump inauguration. Melissa writes, the amount of hate being poured all over the internet over an election has flown right past disgusting to a level of dehumanization that kind of makes me want to cry for humanity. She says some 14,000 people have been forced to evacuate in and around Gatlinburg, Tennessee, and at least 7 people have died, another 14 hospitalized, and thousands of people have lost everything and are sleeping in shelters tonight as massive fires continue to spread out of control there. And instead of coming together in support of each other in a trying time, people are finding it within themselves to politicize a fire and spew hate at each other. Not only are people saying the Gatlinburg fires are karma for the racist Trump supporters who live there, and saying Trump supporters brought this on themselves and are being punished by God for voting for Trump. But people are actually laughing about Trump supporters' houses burning down in Tennessee fires. And even star Michael Ian Black is making glib, dickish jokes about it. It's sick. Sick. After a huge outcry, where even some anti-Trump people called him out for being horrible, at least he had the decency to apologize and remove it. A little late, though, considering the fact that he'd already spread that kind of hate to over 2 million followers. Now, this whole situation should make a lot of people hang their head low because the country is obviously way past the scary point when people can be this openly disgusting about an election, wishing people's houses would burn, wishing that their lives would be destroyed, or that they would die over Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton. Just let that sink in for a minute. Melissa asks, what in the hell has happened to people? She says we need to take a step back and ask ourselves as a society, did this kind of depraved behavior become the norm? Just a thought, but considering the vile nation of the environment in America at this point, can you imagine what this place is going to look like, say, if an economic collapse happens? Because it's going to make every zombie movie you've ever seen look real. Because the hate-fueled masses are already showing how little of their humanity is left. And not even over a life or death situation that actually immediately personally affects them. It truly is a horrifying prospect. And Charles Hugh Smith kind of shows how the mainstream media has set up these narratives. He says 6 narratives on the ascendancy of Trump. Excuses, polarizing narratives to set the table or get the, say, opposition, if you will, in the right frame of mind. And then I'm going to hit a Brandon Smith piece, one of my favorite bloggers. But Charles Hughes Smith writes, he says, perhaps the masses have finally reached the point where the pain of maintaining the status quo now exceeds that of breaking it. He says, a remarkable, diverse array of explanations of Donald Trump's presidential election victory has been aired, representing both the conventional political spectrum and well beyond. But he says, let's start with the conventional mainstream media explanations. 1, Trump was elected by an intolerant American, i.e. deplorables, who are intolerant of immigrants, Muslims, women's rights, gays, etc., while being overly attached to firearms and the Christian religion. So, this is like, as he writes, a sort of broad brush slander that's emotionally appealing to those who lost the election, and it enables the losing party to claim the moral high ground. It also is classic propaganda, a topic that has really been out in the forefront with the propagation of the fake news narrative. But it overlooks that the many progressives who voted for Trump but didn't dare announce their choice to the hysterically intolerant Democratic loyalist friends. For example, consider, what I would say is consider the fact that a lot of middle-class Americans felt disenfranchised and felt like, and I hate to say it because I talk about this all the time, that Trump was a lesser of two evils, which is a horrifying prospect when you have such deplorable choices as a Trump or a Clinton. And it's bad when leftists kind of feel left out because their candidate, and mind you, had the Democratic National Committee not undermined Bernie Sanders, he would be president right now. There's no doubt in my mind that Sanders would have won handily had he been up against Trump, because there's just more of a push for that. But, and that's why I don't know if Trump was the candidate of choice, because it certainly seems to look that way. Now, number two, Trump didn't win the election. Hillary Clinton lost it. That's the second narrative. He says this explanation constructs a narrative from polling data. African-American voters didn't turn out for Hillary in the same high percentage as they did for President Obama. A surprising number of higher-income households voted for Trump, etc. If Hillary had drawn the expected percentage of voters, well, she would have won. But unfortunately, this explanation explains nothing, as it ignores the larger issue that drove voters to vote or not vote. Narrative number three, the unprotected Americans, to use Peggy Noonan's term, who have seen their income and security decline in the age of neoliberal globalization, voted for Trump to reject globalism, unfettered immigration, and free trade. In the U.S. media, this narrative is typically characterized as a sporting event. The losers of neoliberal globalization struck back at the winners. This explanation, Charles writes, draws upon well-established economic trends. Sharply rising inequality. Of course, we see, folks, the chasm between your upper 0.01% and your lower 99.99%. Huge chasm. And there's outbreaks of this populism along with a scourge, if you will, of a desire for fascism. And this looks eerily similar to a pre-World War II Nazi Germany when Hitler ascended to power. It doesn't matter what put us there. And remember, it was income inequality that kind of put us there in the first place for Hitler and the Third Reich. Because you had massive hyperinflation, you had massive income inequality, and then you had the powers that shouldn't be that were pushing Hitler to power and trying to get him in there, a la like the Bushes, the Harrimans, the Whites, and others, high New York business banking types that got him into power. And now look at what we have here. It's almost an identical transition to power. So we have to be very careful about this. And of course, number four is exactly that. Trump's victory is another manifestation of the global revolt against elites. Absolutely right. People are pissed. And they will grasp at anything that gives them a shred of hope of regaining some of that lost ground. Number 5, Trump has been set up as the fall guy for an economy that is teetering on the edge of a recession or even a depression. The coming recession or depression will discredit Trump and the populist nationalist movement, setting the stage for a neoliberal globalist agenda to return to power in 4 more years. Now, Charles writes, he says, while many of us wouldn't put such nefarious scheming past the globalist elites, this doesn't quite align with the reality that virtually everyone, mainstream or alternative, left or right, dismissed Trump's presidential campaign as a media circus sideshow staged by a narcissist. Since virtually no one expected him to win when he entered the race, why would globalists support him when their candidate, Hillary Clinton, was a shoo-in? It's a very good question. However, again, you don't know whether or not Clinton was the candidate. And finally, number 6. The Clinton campaign was a quiet coup of corrupt elites, intended on solidifying the merger of private sector and philanthro-capitalist pay-for-play and government functions. A counter-coup staged by elements of the deep state government that remains in power regardless of which party's in office foiled Clinton's quiet coup. Now, as far-fetched as this may sound, Clinton insider Sidney Blumenthal accused the FBI of staging a coup by reopening the investigation into the Clinton emails. Could very well have happened. And, of course, you had Steve Pachesnik that also talked about this as well. So it could be, but these are 6 narratives that kind of put things out there and also establishes a divide that can be played upon. And what Brandon Smith says of altmarket.com could be setting the table for civil war. He says it's unavoidable. SHTFplan.com mirrored his piece today. It says divided Americans will inevitably turn towards militancy and mob action. Very interesting. And I hold Brandon Smith in high regard because everything that he says seems to be, or based on past experience, is spot on accurate. So he says, you have to hand it to the regressive left. When they conjure propaganda, they really know how to run with it. And when their indoctrination doesn't take, and the public stops them cold with a wall of skepticism, well, they don't give up. No, the little buggers double down and go for broke. He says, I've pointed out, however, that this seemingly boundless drive to forsake all logic and reason in the name of ideology is not due to the people being skeptical in their ambition. Rather, they're following a somewhat successful historic model, the model of communism. And by successful, he says he means successfully destructive. So with Donald Trump on the way to the White House in January, along with a Republican majority in Congress and the Senate, leftists long accustomed to dominating the public narrative through the mainstream media have found themselves without leverage. Now they must resort to ankle biting with efforts like the fake news meme, which is designed to undermine the alternative media through ad hominem. Obviously, this will fail. It is far too late for the mainstream media to gain back any social capital, and they will have to adapt or die out. With this avenue closing for the left, the next stage will be direct asymmetrics. They'll use subversion at a more localized level, working to provoke marginalized groups into taking extreme actions in order to elicit a negative and totalitarian response from conservatives. He says, I'm rather well versed on the history of communist insurgencies, as one simple reality that consistently stands out to me is that whenever or wherever communist movements exist, war inevitably follows. They may claim to be peaceful in their aims and methods. They may claim to want what's best for society as a whole. But when these movements are denied access to social evolution, they almost always revert to violent means. And the primary reason for this, I believe, is that they really do assume at their very core that their ideal is the only ideal. They think they're the heroes, awakened to a worldview that the rest of us are incapable of comprehending. Because see, in their minds, anyone seeking to obstruct them is either dangerously ignorant or a fascist hell-bent on sabotaging humanity's natural progression into the leftist utopia. Therefore, any and all actions are justified on their part. They're fighting evil. And of course, conservatives like you and perhaps me are the physical manifestation of that evil. We are the supervillains that must be destroyed at all costs in the leftist fantasy world. And the defeat of the left, you see, comes with a cost. Regressives in the form of social justice warriors are currently more cute in their provocations than they are dangerous. But this is only an early stage of their movement. Look over in Greece, guys. Look at Greece was a prime example of what happens when this stuff starts to manifest. Greece met severe economic depression, and it started out with a scaling back of benefits because, of course, you had a very heavily socialist model still in Greece today. And when that started to get scaled back due to economic turmoil, what happened? It started off as peaceful protests, but ended out as a lot of violence in the streets. And we could very well be seeing that here in the United States because look at what has happened. Look at how divisive it is. And like I started this news piece, and as Melissa Dykes pointed out, look at how people have lost their humanity and are now calling for people whose houses are burning down to die because they voted for Trump. I mean, I'm kind of at a loss for words as to where we are as a society and how divided we are. You know, I am not one that buys into the nationalist footprint, nor am I a, quote, globalist. But I can tell you, love thy neighbor is a pretty important rule to follow if you want a society that is really built upon good values and virtues and promotes well-being. And that's something that we just have kind of lost our way with. Society should be all about personal responsibility and mutual respect, because you can't have mutual respect without love. If you love somebody, you're going to respect them, you know? You wouldn't have as much, say, driving up to a red light and having the boom boom, the boom boom right next to you, right? Because that's not mutual respect. That's an invasion of somebody else's privacy and civil liberties. Granted, it happens out in public, but we need to respect one another. You know, same thing with property rights. Just an erosion of mutual respect across the board. And personal responsibility. It's at an all-time low. But this is the way society has been engineered. Take a look at the de-evolution of our society. And that's exactly what we have. Through the dumbing down of America, and also through the de-evolution and dehumanization through the mainstream media and through Hollywood. It is sickening where we are today. So if you want real change in America, the thing to do is not to separate, not to focus on your left, your right, you're white, you're black, you're rich, you're poor. No. It doesn't matter if you're Muslim, you're Catholic, you're Jew, what you believe in. What matters is we're all human beings, and we all have to share our portion of this rock that's floating through space. And we can do it the easy way, or we can do it the hard way. But doing it the hard way gives the powers that shouldn't be the upper hand and an easier ability to manipulate and control us. But if we come together, they lose that power. And we can advance as one people with maybe not common purpose, because I don't like that term, but with mutual respect. I'm Joe Joseph. This was the Daily Sheeple's Daily News Brief. Subscribe to this YouTube channel and visit thedailysheeple.com and subscribe to our awesome newsletter. And I will see you all tomorrow. God bless.